Hi there. My name is Eric James. I'm president of the James Preservation Trust. The trust was founded by myself and the late great-grandson of Jesse James, Judge James Randall Ross. We formed the trust to preserve the history of the James family, and we also arrange for dissemination of the information regarding the family. Um, One of the other things we do from time to time, we get involved in the authentications of either artifacts or images, particularly when they come on the market either for sale or at auction, as happened several weeks ago when a gun claimed to have belonged to Jesse James came on the market. Um, the guns of Jesse James are pretty well documented. When Jesse was assassinated, of course, everybody knows the story that right before he was assassinated, he unhooked his belt with his dual holster pistols and he laid them on the bed. That's a fact. Those two pistols were a Smith & Wesson 45 and a Colt Single Action Army 45 with about a 7.5-inch barrel. At the coroner's inquest following Jesse's death, Jesse's widow Z was asked if Jesse had any firearms in his possession at the time that he was murdered. And she said, yes, sir. He had two pistols, a shotgun, and a revolver. A week later, what of his artifacts remained that I hadn't already been stolen, such as his fine thoroughbred horses and one souvenir seeker actually uprooted. He actually uprooted a plant from the front yard when Z came to the door with Jesse's shotgun, threatening to shoot the guy for taking the family dog. But at this auction, there was a revolver that was put up for auction, and that was basically advertised as or reported to be a crippled revolver. In essence, it was basically a parts gun, and that brought about $17. Well, they actually did get around to auctioning Jesse's dog at the same time, and poor dog only brought $15. But after that, Sheriff Enos Craig of the Sheriff's Department there in St. Joe, Missouri, handed over to Z. James the confiscated firearms in his possession, along together with a written receipt. And that receipt documents one breech-loading shotgun, one Winchester rifle, one Smith & Wesson revolver, and one Colt revolver. 40 years later, in 1920, after these guns had fallen into the possession of Jesse's son, Jesse Jr., Jesse Jr. was making a movie called Jesse James Under the Black Flag, in which he was playing his father. The movie itself was a disaster, and poor Jesse Jr. Wound up having a nervous breakdown over it because he had gotten a lot of his friends to invest in the movie. And like most Jesse James movies, it was an utter catastrophe and failure. However, in that movie, if you do have a chance to watch it, you can see Jesse James's own Winchester rifle and his father and Jesse Jr.'s father's Colt 45. About 4 years later, in 1924, Jesse Jr. was involved in a car wreck in Kansas City. And in the back of his car at the time, it was documented that he had two revolvers and a shotgun. Since that time, there have been numerous instances in which guns have come onto the market, either for sale or up at auction, claiming to be the guns of Jesse James. And in fact, sometimes they've even been put on display. And in fact, Jesse Jr.'s own daughters, he had four daughters, and two of them were running a little cafe in Culver City, California, directly across from MGM Studios. And in order to attract patrons to the cafe, they put on display Jesse's guns and also his boots that he was wearing at the time he was assassinated. In 1971, Judge James Ross, whom I mentioned previously, he sued and received compensation for a 1851 Colt revolver that had come up on the auction and had sold at auction and was in the hands of a private party. It was only at that time was it learned that this particular revolver had gone to Jesse Jr.'s widow, Stella McGowan James, and she died before documenting the fact that she had lent out the revolver. And after she died, this revolver went up for sale, and Judge Ross sued for the compensation and received the compensation. That ended a long series of documentation of what happened to Jesse's guns. Shortly after that, the family got together and they decided what best to do with all the relics that they had. And at that time, they donated those relics to James Farm and Museum in Kearney, Missouri, which is where they now reside. Well, flash forward to some of the work of the James Preservation Trust. Just recently, we were alerted to this auction of this gun that was claimed to have belonged to Jesse James. And we made inquiry of the auction house, and they were kind enough to provide us the provenance that the consignor had provided to them. Actually, it's quite an impressive package. It was a package of about that thick, bunch of documents, and I think to the untrained eye or to anyone who was not an historian, it looked pretty darn impressive. If one looked all through this material, one would probably assume that, well, with all this material, this thing has to be authentic. Well, this particular consignor was claiming to be a great-grandson of one of the Hudspeth brothers, Rufus and Napoleon Hudspeth, Babe Hudspeth, who were part of Quantrill's Raiders. They were actually boyhood friends of Jesse's. And they claimed that Jesse's widow had given them this gun right after he died, right after his funeral was held, in which one of the Hudspeth brothers was a pallbearer. Well, that was a fact. What was not a fact in all this provenance was the claim that the consignor was making that he was a relationship. He had a family relationship with the James family, and not only with the James family, but with a number of their in-law families. Well, we challenged that and got the auction house to retract that information. Whether he was actually, the consignor was actually a descendant of the Quantrill Raider brothers, we didn't get into that too much, but we went directly to the issue of the gun. As we saw in this documentation that I've just imparted to you about Jesse's gun, there is a provenance, there is a written documentation, a chain of custody that has been established. We know what the guns were. For this other gun to mysteriously disappear, as the consignor had claimed, it was hidden in an attic. Well, the house in which Jesse was murdered hardly had an attic at all. It might have been called a crawl space, but certainly not an attic, and maybe not even large enough to have confined the trunk that the consignor was claiming. They were also given in addition to the gun. So basically, this story raised a lot of red flags, and the real red flag was with Jesse's widow Z. We all know when she died, she was virtually left penniless. When Jesse died, he only had about $200 to his name. Most of that was in Confederate currency, pretty much useless unless he could find somebody who could trust the currency and its value, or they could trust him with it. So it was pretty useless money. And all that she basically had left were his boots, his clothing, and his 4 guns. So the question arises, if this gun was given to the Hudspeth brothers and Jesse's widow was so needy at the time, she had no income, she had no job, she had no occupation, she had 2 children to raise, she was a penniless widow, why would she give away the only thing she held of value as a memorial and memento? It doesn't stand to logic, it doesn't stand to reason. So these are kind of the kinds of things that the James Preservation Trust encounters from time to time. I do have one thing to show you, however. There is one firearm that I have that belonged to Jesse and Frank's uncle, Jesse Cole Richards. Jesse Richard Cole, excuse me. This rifle came out of Cole's Tavern here in Midway, Kentucky. That's where Frank and Jesse's mother was born. She was born in basically what we would call today a roadhouse. The family occupied this ordinary, and it was an old um, uh, uh, log cabin in which an addition had been added onto over the years, long established in the area since the 1780s. And that's where Jesse and Frank's mother was born, and grew up at least until she was about 11 or 12 years old, maybe even 13. So she saw every kind of low life and high life. Her uncle was murdered in that ordinary, and when the ordinary was being refurbished in the 1990s, in the old log cabin portion of it, the wall was broken open, and inside the wall was this particular rifle, together with some other artifacts, some boots that belonged to Jesse and Frank's mother. But this is the rifle right here. It's an authentic uh, cadet rifle from the War of 1812, in which Jesse Richard Cole served, along with uh, Jesse and Frank's grandfather, John M. James. You notice here it's missing the trigger guard. But that I have in my possession, and that's about one of the few relics that are left that actually did belong to the Jesse James family.